This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is May 14th, 2023. I'm extremely excited about what I'm going to be discussing today. I have made huge advances in my breakthrough theory that Jesus Christ is the substitute full king and the Messiah, son of Joseph, who is put through a mock coronation according to a Hittite scapegoat ritual, which saves the real king because the gods are tricked into believing that the real king has been killed. But instead, a substitute full king is put through a mock coronation ritual and then either chased off or killed in the real king's place. I did a video 2 years ago about this, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. It was called The Scapegoat Jesus Christ, and it's still on all my channels. I covered it more extensively than I did in my videos in the first volume of my series, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. I also covered it very thoroughly in the latest edition is the best, the third edition of Rise Above the Gods Who Hate Us. You can find those books on my website, CJBBooks.com. There will also be a link to that in the description below. And I really want to warmly thank those of you who have contributed. Contributions I got from my last video make this video possible, and it's a blockbuster. Your funding has also enabled me to conduct this research, which is the product of my work on volume 3 of this series. And wow, I've really pieced it all together very thoroughly. I have expanded my theory on the Hittite scapegoat ritual of the substitute full king as it relates to Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son of David, to the Old Testament. I found exactly in the Old Testament where all this first appeared in regards to King Saul, King David, King Saul's daughter and David's wife, Michal, and King Saul's son, who was heir to the throne, Jonathan. And I have pieced together all of the parallels between those stories told in the books of Samuel, especially as they originally appeared in the Septuagint, and the gospel narrative of the substitute full king as it appears in some versions of Matthew chapter 27 and John, especially chapter 20 of John. And I've set up all the correspondences. I figured out the secret meanings behind all of this, exactly what the Messiah, son of Joseph represents, exactly what the Messiah, son of David represents, how they correlate. And I have figured out that they are one androgynous being, which is created in the womb, then is separated and has to be reunited. The Messiah, son of Joseph, is the female aspect of the androgyne. The twin messiahs are an androgyne, like Adam was, that was separated and has to be pieced back together. And the Messiah, son of Joseph, represents the female aspect of that androgyne. She is the womb, she is the blood, and the blood is the soul of the twin messiahs. And as I've been saying for years now, Messiah, son of Joseph, has to die and give up his higher soul, the soul of darkness, the soul of chaos, Yehida, which is the highest and most precious form of soul and the original soul, because the Messiah, son of Joseph, is the firstborn, the first to leave the womb. She carries that highest soul and must die in order for that soul to be released from the vessel of her body and enter the vessel of the male aspect of the twin messiahs, which is an androgyne, which is Messiah, son of David. He is the vessel. The vessel has to incorporate this soul through the Messiah, son of Joseph, who dies in combat with the Gentiles in order to preserve the life of Messiah, son of David, who then inherits and incorporates that soul of the firstborn womb, the blood of Messiah, son of Joseph. And I've been saying that for years, but I found the proof in the Old Testament where it expressly states that once you have decoded the secret meanings and what they all mean. And I've established the correlations of that between the Old Testament character, the son of King Saul, King Jonathan, who was heir to the throne, but is killed in combat so that David can become king. And that correlates in the New Testament to John the evangelist, who is the disciple whom Jesus loved. Jonathan in the Old Testament so loved King David that he gave him his soul. And that is the origin of the idea that the Messiah, son of Joseph, must perish in combat, die, and yield up his soul to David and David's heirs. And I'm going to be showing you all those quotations and all that proof in the following video. I very much want to thank those of you who have donated, made all this research possible, made this video possible. Really, from my heart, thank you so much. I never, ever could have done this without you, and I want you to know that your contributions are a part of this and that you are responsible for this. And those of you who would like to contribute, I have contribution links on my website, cjbbooks.com, beneath each title, and they will also appear beneath this video. Thank you again. This is such important research, and you have allowed me to tie it all together and complete the theory so that it is not only a theory of the Hittite rituals in the New Testament gospel narrative of the Passion of Christ, but I have now found its roots in the Old Testament, and I have linked it to Canaanite mythology in very interesting and unexpected ways. I may not get to the Canaanite part in this video. I'll try. If not, I'll make another video to cover all of that. So let's get to it. King Saul was the first king of Israel, and firsts in Judaism are always very important. Cain was the first son, Esau was the first son, and Jonathan was the first son of King Saul, and heir to King Saul's throne. And King Saul was not a Judahite, but he was the first king of Israel. And first and firstborn in Judaism represents primordial chaos, which exists before order. It is considered the womb, it is considered female, it is considered to be darkness and evil. It represents the other side, the Sitra Achra. So King Saul is the first king, and the king representing the other side. In the cosmology of the ancients, light, which is male and good and provides order, enters as male seed into the womb of primordial chaos and begins creation of ordered forms which replicate the ideal form and order of the intellect of the gods. The Jews portray themselves as this male entity of light, of male seed. That male seed represents the olive tree, which is the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, the second tree to be planted. The first tree was a grapevine and a fig tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which represents primordial chaos. Those two trees are twins, and it is only by combining them that creation is formed. Likewise, according to the myths of Judaism, Jewry has to combine with the Gentile world, the evil other side. And one of the ways in which it does that is through the twin messiahs. The Messiah, son of Joseph, who represents the female aspect of the twin messiahs, and Messiah, son of David, who is the male aspect, the seed. The female aspect is the womb and the blood. The blood in Judaism represents the soul. The seed in Judaism represents the light. The olive has to be torn and shredded to release its oil, and when the oil is burned, it gives off the eternal divine flame. So these two elements have to commingle, and the two messiahs, the two kings, are an androgyne. They have a male aspect and a female aspect. And I arrived at this conclusion years ago, and now I found all the proof. And when it's very interesting when I go searching through Jewish and Christian art, it seems that the artists have been clued in on all this encoded stuff, which is never revealed to regular Christians or regular Jews, but only to the highest level of initiates. And I'm wondering if this art is being contracted by patrons who are aware of all this and commission the art to secretly reveal it in coded form. I'm going to be showing you depictions of King David and King Saul's firstborn son, Jonathan. Jonathan is the heir to the throne, but Jonathan dies in combat, and it is King David, the secondborn, who represents the tribe of Judah, who becomes the second king of Israel. And therein lies the basis for all of the mythology of the twin messiahs and the suffering Messiah, son of Joseph, who is the Messiah anointed for war, and who is the Messiah who enters the Gentile world, the prison of the Gentile world, to engage in combat against the Gentiles, kill them off, and then empower the throne of David to take over the entire world. And this is all encoded into the books of Samuel, which were one book in the Septuagint. And we can see in this art that there is a female character who is Jonathan, and there is a male character who is David. Jonathan represents later the Messiah, son of Joseph, and David represents later the Messiah, son of David. Now, this is often construed, and I believe it's true, and I've written about it myself, that this represents a homosexual relationship. But there is a much deeper and more significant meaning in that it represents an androgynous relationship. These are the male and the female aspect of one being. And the female aspect has to perish so that the blood and the soul can leave the vessel of the female's body and enter the male's body. This also represents the transference of the soul of the Gentiles to the Jews as the vessel, the ultimate vessel for that soul, so that Gentiles must be exterminated so that their higher soul, the soul of Tohu, the soul of Yechida, can be assimilated and absorbed by the Jews and captured by them into one androgynous being. And the way that this is done, and this is portrayed again and again in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and in the Kabbalistic writings, including the Galia Raza, this is done by the Messiah, son of David, marrying a Gentile wife and capturing the soul of the Gentiles in that way by utilizing that womb to place his male seed of light into the blood of that womb, the womb is considered nurturing that seed with its blood as a vessel to form a new life. And that new life then incorporates the soul of the Gentiles, captures their soul, and instills it in the Jewish people. So the Jewish people who are the second born, Jacob, inherit that soul of Cain, which is the soul of the devil, which was bestowed upon Cain through Eve, the female aspect of Adam. So this whole process is a process of capturing the soul of the Gentiles through the death of their king, who is in fact a female aspect of the twin Messiahs, Messiah, son of Joseph, and becomes the womb into which Jewry injects its male seed of light, the pressings of the olive tree, into the derived blood of the pressings of the grapevine. Through the spilled blood of the Gentiles, that soul is then released, and the two trees become one, the two Messiahs become one, and the Jewish people become the vessel for the soul of the Gentiles and become one. And that is what the rabbis are constantly talking about as the idea of Esau returning to Jewry, is the recombination in the new womb of that separated androgyne into one form, body and soul. So again, we see the female and the male as Jonathan, son of King Saul, firstborn son of King Saul being the first king to become the soul of King David, who will become the second king and steal the birthright, blessings, and soul of firstborn Jonathan in the precise way that Jacob steals the birthright, blessings, and soul of Esau, which is the soul of Cain, which is the soul of Satan. Here again, we see David represented as the male aspect of the twin messiahs, and we see Jonathan represented as the female aspect of the two messiahs, and we also see the two trees of the Garden of Eden. We see the olive tree, which represents the light and the male seed, and the olives, which release their oil to light the candelabra of the menorah. And we see the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which produces the blood, the wine, the grape juice. Donatello depicted the androgynous aspect of David. He created an extremely feminine David that appears to have both male and female sexual organs, and has the classic features of the ancient androgyne Phanes Protogynous. And I think Donatello was keyed into the fact that David was the male aspect of this androgyne, which is the combination of King Saul's son, Jonathan, and David, who usurps the throne of Saul and then becomes the second king, the second-born king of the Israelites. Here again, we see the male aspect of David represented and the female aspect of Jonathan. And now we see the two trees, the tree of darkness and the tree of light, stemming from the womb. And this goes back to one of my videos where I described how the olive tree often assumes two trunks, and then at the base of the trunks forms a hollow which represents the womb. And it is out of this womb that firstborn female Jonathan was born as to be heir to the first king Saul. But then David comes along. Jonathan must die, give up his soul so that David can live. And we see also in the mausoleum the female and the male depicted. And we see in this art often the escaping of the soul to become the one androgynous being of Messiah, son of David, who is the vessel, the male vessel, and the female soul that enters that vessel. Rembrandt depicted it very vividly by making Jonathan, who is the Messiah anointed for war. He is a fantastic archer and a great soldier, dressed in pink, female pink, with a female appearance, and David in blue, representing the male aspect of the two messiahs, of the two kings, the one king who dies so that the second-born can live and assume the throne and assume his soul, his birthright, and his blessings. There is an exact correspondence in inversion to this in the Gospels. In the Gospels, Jesus is the male aspect, and tellingly enough, it is John the evangelist, as in Jonathan, who is the female aspect. And again, many people have commented that this represents a homosexual relationship between Jesus and the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, who is the narrator of the Gospel of John. And as I said, I've written about that. That's only the surface level. The deeper and much more important meaning is that these two characters are in fact an androgyne, and Jesus is simply the male aspect of that androgyne. And John the Evangelist is the female aspect of that. And the female aspect is the soul, and it is the soul that escapes and continues to live when the body is killed, when the male aspect is killed. And the soul transfers from Messiah, son of Joseph, Jesus Christ, to Messiah, son of David, Jesus Barabbas, at the crucifixion. And all of this is represented in the Gospel of John as a direct correspondence to the story told of King Saul, his son Jonathan, who loved David, and David being represented by Jesus. So John becomes Jonathan, Saul becomes Judas and Pilate, and David becomes Jesus. And this is all an inversion. It is a direct correspondence, but it's a correspondence to the other side, which is the complete opposite of the right-hand side. The Sitra Achra is the inversion of the Sitra Yamina. But all of this, again, represents an unfolding series of the division of the androgyne into its male and female aspect. Jesus unfolds as the female aspect of King David, but then Jesus himself has two aspects, a male aspect and a female aspect. And this is not unique in Judaism. Everything always breaks down in that way. It is separated into its male and female aspect, and then each of those aspects has a male and a female aspect, and it goes on and on and on. So we see that Jesus is holding a phallic image to demonstrate that he is the male with the beard, and John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, is represented as the feminine female aspect of the same being. So it's not simply a homosexual relationship. On a much deeper level, it is an androgyne who has been separated into its two aspects and must be recombined. But the way that it will ultimately be recombined is that the female aspect, the soul of Christ, will leave the vessel of Christ's deceased body and enter the vessel of the living David. And Jesus is killed fighting for David against the Gentiles, against Pilate, to ultimately give up his soul and complete the androgyne of David and enter the male vessel of his body as his female blood, his soul, his wine. Here again, we have the male Jesus, the female John, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Jesus is the bread, which is the male, the flesh. John is the blood, which is the womb and the soul. And Jesus is served up as the sacrificial lamb goat so that Messiah, son of David, Jesus Barabbas, can live. And the devil feasts upon that goat in the same manner that it does on Yom Kippur to transfer the sins of the Jews onto the Gentiles and to damn them to hell where they are nullified and give up their soul. And that soul then enters Jewry, just as Jesus' soul, when he is crucified, his female aspect, John the Evangelist, enters into David, who has usurped the throne of Jonathan from Saul and become the king of the Jews and king of the world. Same thing again, we have the female and the male. The feast, Jesus is the fish, the Leviathan, the evil serpent. That's another aspect of the duality, the dualism of Judaism, is the serpent of darkness and the serpent of light, who are ultimately one androgynous being, just as Tiamat and Apsu are the fresh water and the salt water that combine to form creation. Jesus told the Gentiles and the Christians that they are the salt of the earth, the evil other side, the female side, and that has to blend with the fresh water to form creation and to complete Jewry, where Esau, the salt, returns to Jewry and enters as the soul of Jacob, King David. Again, we see the male and the female. We see the bread, again represented as sort of a phallic symbol. Yet again, the male and the female, the phallic image, and the female prostrate before the male, embracing him. But again, bear in mind, this is the female aspect. It's not simply a homosexual relationship. It is an androgyne being completed. Well, an androgyne who has been separated and will give up its female aspect to the male aspect of its being, which is David. The wine is the soul, the blood. She, John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, is glancing at her soul. Jesus is sacrificed as the goat lamb to the devil. That's made clear in the ransom theory of atonement of Origen of Alexandria and Gregory of Nyssa. Jesus is the male aspect, the flesh. John the Evangelist is the soul, the blood, the wine. This etching depicts what I'm describing really well. I'm so glad I found it. It's really nice. You have the male aspect of David, the female aspect of Jonathan, and you have the womb of the olive tree. And you have the olive tree, the tree of life in the Garden of Eden, and you have the fig tree. It even shows it with fig leaves, of the tree of knowledge of good and evil as being the two trunks which grow out of the root of Jesse from the womb of the olive tree. And you see that in the womb, the androgyne was complete and will be complete again. Jonathan was a famous archer, and David bore the staff that budded for Aaron, which Adam also held according to Jewish legend. And so those two figures are combined into one androgynous form, which is the twin messiahs. And they will return back to that womb. So the dark fig tree of knowledge is here. The light olive tree of life is here. The female aspect, Jonathan of Lilith, who through Eve bore Cain. Esau's inherited Cain's soul, which passed along to Jesus. It represents the darkness, the chaos of the firstborn. The tree of life, the tree of knowledge was planted by Samael in the Garden of Eden as the first tree, which sprouted from the root. And it is the womb which carries the blood, which nourishes the male seed, the male aspect. David, derived from Yahweh, he was born through Abel, whose soul passed along to Seth, and then to Jacob as the second born, the second of the twins. He represents light and order, which imposes order on chaos, so it comes to dominate and enslave chaos. And it has the male seed, which enters into the darkness of the womb to generate creation and order and replications of divine form in the material world. The womb is where the androgyne is created. It separates out in a catastrophe into the division of the male and the female aspects. As I've been explaining for years, there is this model where the Messiah, son of Joseph, goes into combat against the Gentiles and is killed and gives up his soul to Messiah, son of David. And I prove that in the gospel narrative. But the same thing appears in the medieval Jewish apocalypses, including the Sefer Zerubbabel, where Messiah, son of Joseph, is killed in combat with the Gentiles, subverting them, destroying them, and then gives up his soul to Messiah, son of David. He is the substitute fool king who is crowned in a mock coronation ritual, and then he dies in David's place. So I have now found in the Old Testament where that originates, unless I find something even earlier, in the story of David, Jonathan, and King Saul. So this, what I'm trying to emphasize is that this is consistent throughout all of Judaism. It appears in the Old Testament. It reappears in the New Testament with the exact same characters inverted. And it continues on into the medieval Jewish apocalypses on through to the Gaon of Vilna, who wrote quite extensively in his Kabbalistic works in the late 1700s about Armilus and Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son of David, in league with the medieval interpretations of this same pattern. So I found it I found what may well be the source. There are older sources, which I'll get to in the Canaanite mythology, of this this replication of cosmology, where the androgyne is separated in the womb, which is the original Godhead. It's divided into its male aspect and its female aspect. Its female aspect emanates first from the womb of the Godhead, to become primordial chaos and darkness, and the womb and the blood and the soul, which then into which is ejaculated the male seed of light as the second emanation. That light carries the intellect, the first intellect of the Godhead, which then instills its will and its divine order on the primordial chaos. And that is the underlying and encrypted message that is told in the books of Samuel about David, Jonathan, and King Saul. And Samuel, first book of Samuel, chapter 18, verse 1 says, David and Jonathan's friendship, it wasn't a friendship, they are one androgynous being. As soon as he finished speaking to Saul, Saul is the father of Jonathan and the first king of Israel. Jonathan is the heir to Saul's throne and the firstborn son of Saul. The soul of Jonathan, in other words, the soul that is to inherit the throne of Israel, was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him his own soul. So Jonathan gives up his soul, his birthright as the firstborn, his blessing as the firstborn, his very soul, he gives it to David. And in order to give it to David, he has to die so that his soul escapes the prison of the vessel of his body, which is primordial chaos, and joins with the light of David to become the completed twin messiahs, reunited as the androgynous form of the future king of Israel, the Messiah, son of David. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26 states, I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of a woman. So this is not simply a homosexual relationship between firstborn Jonathan and the second king of Israel, David. It is an androgynous relationship where they are recombined, body and soul, vessel and blood, into one being in the future king David. This is exactly copied in the New Testament. And one of the things I'm getting to now is that Saul has an evil spirit enter into him. So Saul represents the devil. Satan enters into Saul. And the exact same thing happens with Judas. Satan enters into Judas. And Judas successfully gets Jesus killed. Saul, when the evil spirit enters into him, attempts to kill David, but is unsuccessful. So we see that Jesus is successfully killed. The Messiah, son of Joseph, the substitute fool king, is sacrificed in order to enable Messiah, son of David, Jesus Barabbas, to live. So the story is retold, and the substitute fool king is killed in David's place. And it's important to note that Judas plays the role of Saul and is Satan, as Saul was Satan, the firstborn of chaos, the first king of Israel. Pontius Pilate also plays the role of Satan in the gospel narrative, as does Nathaniel, as I have explained in my books and in my other videos, and you may find that interesting. You might want to go back to my other videos and read my books to learn more about that. So, Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 2 states, the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Verse 23 and forward. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's the narrator of this gospel, John the evangelist, who plays the role of Jonathan. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple, and said, "Ask him which one he means." There's often this trinity of Jesus, the disciple whom Jesus loved, who is Jonathan, and Simon Peter. It happens again at the empty tomb and at the Sea of Galilee. And the empty tomb becomes very significant, as you'll soon find out. Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. What is happening in this story, Jesus' flesh is the goat that is given to Satan on Yom Kippur to transfer the sins of Israel onto the Gentiles. Jesus represents the Gentiles and this scapegoat. So Jesus is giving up his flesh to Satan so that Messiah, son of David, can inherit the throne of the world, and so that the Gentiles are scapegoated for all the sins of Jewry, and so that Messiah, son of Joseph, is scapegoated for King David's sins. Now this, again, is all a retelling of what happens in the books of Samuel. In 1 Samuel 16, verses 13 and forward, it describes how Satan enters King Saul, just as Satan entered Judas. And King Saul sets about to slay David, just as Judas successfully sets about to get Jesus killed. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. David in Saul's service. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul's attendant said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre." A lyre is a harp. "He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." This is a retelling of the Greek myth of Orpheus, who enters into hell when his wife dies to recapture her. And he calms the king of Hades in the underworld of hell by playing the harp, the lyre. So David represents Orpheus in this myth, and Saul represents the king of hell, Hades, Satan, Samael. And I found, after I had created this theory, that indeed there is Jewish art depicting this, where David is shown playing the harp as Orpheus. Orpheus also played the harp to calm the animals, and he was depicted in Greek art surrounded by a menagerie of animals. And King David as Orpheus in a synagogue mosaic. And that says David. And it is, again, depicting David exactly as the Greeks had depicted Orpheus, playing the lyre, playing the harp, surrounded by a menagerie of animals. And I'm going to get into much more of how this relates to the story of King Saul, who killed his thousands, whereas David killed his tens of thousands. Well, I'll just explain it now. That relates also to the story of Orpheus. Orpheus was killed, he was dismembered, and his head and his harp floated down the river and was made into an oracle. That oracle became more popular than the oracle of Apollo, and Apollo became jealous and asked the oracle of Orpheus to stop prophesying. And this translates, the Jews copied this in the story of David and Saul, to Saul being jealous. And there were women singing songs in the Greek story celebrating the fact that that the oracle of Orpheus had become more popular than the oracle of Apollo. This was syncretically incorporated into Judaism as King Saul lamenting the fact that women were singing the praises of David by saying that Saul killed his thousands, David killed his tens of thousands. And that's what tipped Saul off to the fact that David would eventually become more popular than him and replace him as king. And that is what inspired Saul to set about to try to kill off David so that David could not usurp his throne. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the lyre. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes on you, and you will feel better." That is David, being Orpheus, playing for Saul, who is the king of Hades, to calm him. So Saul said to his attendants, "Find someone who plays well and bring him to me." One of the servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem," remember Bethlehem as in Jesus, "who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. Indeed, he cuts off Goliath's head, as in the serpent's curse, as in the Noahide laws, which is what initially ingratiated him to Saul and to the Israelites. He speaks well and is a fine-looking man, and the Lord is with him." Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse. Those messengers reappear in the gospel narrative. And said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. Jesus rides the colt of an ass into Jerusalem. That ass bears the bread, which is Jesus' flesh, the skin of wine, which is Jesus' blood, and the young goat, which is the scapegoat lamb of Jesus Christ, who is being delivered to Saul, Satan, as the sacrificial offering of Jesus Christ. All of this is found in the story of David and Saul, and the Gospels simply retell that story in encrypted form. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, "Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." Whenever the Spirit from God came on Saul, David would take up his lyre and play. Then relief would come to Saul, he would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. That was exactly what happened with Orpheus when he descended into hell. He calmed the king of Hades, Satan, by playing his lyre, his harp. 1 Samuel chapter 17 talks about David and Goliath, as I mentioned. He cuts off his head in fulfillment of the serpent's curse, and what was to become the Noahide laws. And that was really the beginning of David usurping the throne of King Saul, and of David also taking away the birthright, the blessings, and the soul of King Saul's firstborn son, Jonathan. There is also 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 9, where it talks about this evil spirit, as in the evil spirit that enters into Judas. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, while David was playing the lyre. Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, his javelin, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. And the way that he escaped was he placed an idol with goat's hair in his bed, which represents the substitute fool king, which tricks the gods, that god being Satan, Saul, into believing that that substitute is David himself. That substitute is coronated with goat's hair as its crown. We'll get into all that in just a moment. So this is where things get really interesting and incredibly esoteric. When I figured all this out, it just blew my mind how consistent this model, this plan has been from at least the time of the Septuagint, through the Gospels, through the medieval period, and we see it playing out today. And it's, once you know the code, it all becomes so crystal clear. And they have remained consistent to this exact plan from the very beginning. And you're about to learn what it is. So let me get out of the way. Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you." So this revealed to King Saul that he was going to lose his throne to King David. This is symbolic of the Gentiles, who always had superior empires and kingdoms to the Jews, surrendering their rights as the firstborn of primordial chaos, as the lot of Samael, the devil, giving all that up to the children of Yahweh, the Jews, the second-born. Saul sees this coming. He's been informed that this is going to happen. So he sets about to kill King David. As I explained, the scapegoat ritual of the Hittites, whenever the king was threatened with imminent death, as David is threatened here with imminent death by Saul, who is going to kill him so that he doesn't usurp his throne. In the Hittite ritual, what was done to prevent that is that a substitute fool king, a prisoner, was dressed as the king, given a mock crown, a mock robe, a mock coronation, was scourged, and then was sent off or sacrificed to the gods in the place of the real king, and that saved the life of the real king. The substitute fool king dies, gives up his soul. That soul is inherited by the real king, and the real king is allowed to live and take his throne. And in Judaism, that adds the element of the idea that the real king is actually a substitute himself, who is taking the place of the birthright of the firstborn king. The secondborn, like Jacob, takes the place of the firstborn, who is like Esau. Jesus is Esau. Jesus Barabbas is King David. And so the gospel narrative is a retelling of the narrative in Samuel of Saul, Jonathan, who is to replace Saul, and David, who replaces both Saul and Jonathan. So there's King Saul wants to kill David so that David doesn't usurp his throne. David has become very popular, and King Saul is told that David is going to take over his throne. The secondborn is going to replace the firstborn. King Saul's daughter, Michal, is married to King David. So that would make King David the heir anyway. But Jonathan's got to get out of the way. And both Jonathan and Michal betray King Saul, their father, for the benefit of David, who is to replace King Saul and Jonathan on King Saul's throne. Jonathan warns David that this is going to happen. Michal helps David to escape and puts an idol in David's place on David's bed when King Saul sends his messengers to come and assassinate David. This idol, as it's described in later versions of Samael, is called a cenotaph, a kenotophia, in the original Greek of the Septuagint. And that's extremely interesting because this is an idol which is meant to deceive the messengers into believing that it is David in his bed. In other words, it is the substitute fool king who takes David's place in death so that David can live. And it is an idol. Not only that, it is an idol dressed in the flesh or the hair of a goat, as in the scapegoat offered to Satan on Yom Kippur. Remember that King Saul is Satan, so he is being given this scapegoat in David's place, just as Jesus Christ was given in the place of Jesus Barabbas to Satan in the form of Pontius Pilate, to be eaten by Satan and take over the sins of King David, and then ensure that the nation of Israel survive and have its King David. So Michal, called Melhol in the Septuagint, 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 13 and 16, it states, "And Michal took the cenotaphs and placed it on the bed," that's David's bed, "and a liver of goats was placed at his head, and she covered them with a cloth. And the messengers come and behold the cenotaphs on the bed, and the liver of goats at his head." The liver of goats is another fascinating thing that I figured out, and it represents Prometheus. Prometheus is recast as the devil in the Torah. It was Prometheus who gave men knowledge. Prometheus is the serpent in the Garden of Eden who bestows knowledge upon mankind by tempting Adam and Eve to consume that knowledge. In the Greek myth, Prometheus's liver is torn out each day by the eagle of Zeus. Zeus is the gods who are angry at Prometheus for giving men knowledge, which will enable men to usurp the throne of the gods. and replace the gods, the Olympian gods, by killing them off. So this is a cryptic reference to this idol being Samael, the devil, the serpent, whose liver, Prometheus's liver, is torn out, and it is the liver of a goat because Jesus is the scapegoat given to the devil on Yom Kippur. Note the word cenotaph. That later becomes teraphim and idol in later translations and reproductions of Samuel. Cenotaph is a Greek term for an honorary tomb which is erected in the place of the tomb that actually bears the body. It is a substitute empty tomb for the real tomb to represent and honor the person who has died. So David is being replaced by an empty tomb, just as Jesus' tomb is found to be empty by Mary Magdalene and by John, who is Jonathan, the son of King Saul, in the gospel narrative of John in chapter 20. And it may be all a little bit confusing at this time, but I will explain all of it and give you the verses that explain all of it. But take note of the fact that in the Septuagint, the word used for that idol is cenotaph, which means empty tomb, an honorary tomb that does not contain the body that is being honored. That body is either buried elsewhere or the corpse has never been recovered. This is done so that David can live. An idol of a goat is being put in David's place, just as Jesus, the scapegoat, is put in the place of Messiah, son of David, and is killed as Messiah, son of Joseph, so that Messiah, son of David, can live. This is the Qumran scroll that contains those verses, but it is missing the most relevant parts. I just wanted to put this up so that those of you who read Hebrew can read how this verse is evolving in time from the original Greek version of the Septuagint, which is the oldest known version, which talks about the cenotaph, the empty tomb, the honorary empty tomb, and the goat's liver representing Prometheus as the devil. And Jesus Christ, the Messiah, son of Joseph, is the devil, the reincarnation of the soul of Cain. We then move on to the Vulgate, which is also a very interesting translation. And Michal took a statue and laid it on the bed and put a goat's skin with the hair at the head of it and covered it with clothes. And when the messengers come in, they found an effigy upon the bed and a goat skin at its head. This is very interesting. The goat's liver becomes the goat's skin. What did Jacob do? He put on, Rebekah instructed him to put on the goat's skin to imitate Esau. So David is imitating Esau and offering up this Esau to be killed so that David can take Jonathan's place as heir to the throne. He is taking the place of firstborn Jonathan, son of Saul, to become heir to Saul's throne. And he's doing it in the exact same manner that Jacob steals firstborn Esau's birthright by donning the goat skin as a crypto-Jew. Note also, he puts on, and they cover this statue with clothes. When Mary Magdalene, who plays the role of Michal, looks into the empty tomb, they find the linens on the empty tomb. These linens are replicating the story of the substitute fool king that David's wife, Michal, places in his bed. And when the messengers come in, these messengers are replaced in the gospel story by the guards. They found an effigy upon the bed and a goat skin at his head. And all of these characters are replaced in the gospel narrative by the angels, by the linens, by the empty tomb. Remember that the statue was initially the cenotaph, the empty tomb, the honorary empty tomb. And that has become an effigy. And that word, simulacrum, in Latin can mean also like a phantasm, a ghost that has replaced the original being as its effigy. So we have the substitute fool king replacing David in death so that David can live. Here we have the Masoretic text, which is served for the King James and many other translations. And Michal took the teraphim, which is an idol, and laid it in the bed, and put a quilt of goat's hair at the head thereof, and covered it with a cloth. And when the messengers came in, behold, the teraphim was in the bed, with the quilt of goat's hair at the head thereof. So take note of all these elements, because there are direct correspondences in John chapter 20 to each of these characters and each of these elements, and the whole concept of the Messiah, son of Joseph, as a substitute fool king is told in this story of this idol being placed in the bed of David when King Saul sends his messengers to assassinate David, and they find this idol instead. Jesus was instead killed by Pontius Pilate and the high priest Caiaphas to serve as the substitute for Jesus Barabbas, the Messiah, son of David, so that he could live and become king. So it is the process of transferring the rights of kingship from King Saul, the first king of Israel, to King David as the second born of the Judahites. I found an interesting article which touches on these things. It was published in the Expositor in 1875, and it was written by F.W. Farrar. The word cenotaph in 1 Samuel 19, verses 13 through 16, leads to the further conclusion, which I have elsewhere shown to be highly probable, that the teraphim, the idol, were in reality sculpted images of departed ancestors. The passage is, however, very remarkable on other grounds. For instead of saying Michal took an image, literally the teraphim, for the word is always used, like the Latin penates, in the plural, though here there can only have been one image, and put it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. They rendered it, Michal took the cenotaphs, this is referring to the Septuagint, and placed on the bed, and placed at his head a liver of goats. This shows that they read kabhed, a liver, instead of kabhir, a pillow. For Schlesner's conjecture that the Greek is only a bad attempt to represent kabher in Greek letters is inconceivable. Now, in this very curious reading, Josephus follows them, for he does not even allude to the teraphim, but says, Antiquities, Book 6, Chapter 2, verse 4, that Michal, having let David escape by a cord out of the window. David, interestingly, escapes through the window in the same way that Saul, as in King Saul, who became Paul, escaped out of a window. I get into that in the third volume of Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. I won't delve into that now. Fitted up a bed for him as if he were sick, and put under the bedclothes a goat's liver. And when her father sent to seize David, showed the bed covered, and made them believe by the leaping of the liver, which caused the bedclothes to move also, that David breathed like one that was asthmatic. It may be an accidental circumstance that in Ezekiel 21:21, teraphim are mentioned in connection with looking into livers for purposes of divination. Otherwise, we might conclude, as Mr. R. Stuart Poole has done, that Michal was actually trying to divine the future by sacrificing to the teraphim and examining the entrails of the victim when the messengers of Saul arrived. I disagree with that, and I think that the liver, again, represents the liver of Prometheus being torn out by the eagle of Zeus as jewelry, tearing out the liver of the devil to offer to Zeus, who is the storm god Yahweh, and to demonstrate that all of this represents knowledge being the curse of death, and that curse of death being transposed to the Gentiles through this goat's liver sacrifice to Satan in something very similar to the Yom Kippur ritual of giving up this effigy of David to Satan, Saul, in David's place, so that David can be forgiven of his sins and become king of Israel and usurp the throne of Saul. In other words, the light will usurp the throne of darkness. The firstborn will be replaced by the secondborn, and the firstborn is offered up into Moloch as that sacrifice, so that it gives up its soul, which is then inherited by the vessel of the secondborn David. So I'm going to go through how the Gospels correspond precisely to this story of David, Saul, Jonathan, and Michal. King Saul's daughter, and David's wife, Michal, appear in the Gospel of John at Jesus' empty tomb, as in cenotaph, as Mary Magdalene, together with Jonathan, who is now called John. Mary Magdalene is Michal, David's wife. Paul was first named Saul and escaped out of a window like David. See 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 12, and 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 33. King Saul first paved the way for King David and Messiah, son of David. Saul becomes Paul in Christianity to pave the way for the substitute full king, Messiah, son of Joseph, Jesus Christ, as opposed to Messiah, son of David, Jesus Barabbas. When Saul sent men to slay David in his home, David's wife, Michal, placed an idol with goat's hair in David's bed. That idol was the substitute full king, which tricked the devil and allowed the real king to escape and live, allowed David to live and usurp Saul's throne. Jesus was the idol and the scapegoat who died so that King David's heir, Jesus Barabbas, Messiah, son of David, would escape Pilate's death sentence and live. The devil also appears as Pilate, who washes his hands because he's about to eat the meal of the scapegoat. Mark chapter 16, verses 1 through 8 is the earliest version of this retelling of this story, and it provides the original synoptic gospel account of the story of David, Michal, and the cenotaph, the idol with the goat's hair covered in a cloth, as the story of Jesus, Mary, and the empty tomb, which is later told in Gospel of John. Mark chapter 16 reads, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene plays the role of Michal, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. The young man in the white robe is the idol who has taken David's place to save his life. The young man bears the clothes that were placed on the idol or effigy in David's bed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. So this is the same story as the idol placed in David's bed. So David lives. The idol is him being killed. The soul of the idol enters into David, and the androgynous twin messiahs is formed. Matthew chapter 28, verse 15 reads, it embellishes the story and incorporates the additional elements of the guards. In the gospel story, they're the guards. In the story of David, they are the messengers of Saul from the original story in 1 Samuel. After the Sabbath, at dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, who again is Michal, David's wife, and daughter of King Saul, and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel represents the idol or effigy, which is dressed in the cloth that Michal placed on the idol. The guards are the messengers of Saul who were sent to assassinate David, and they are alarmed by the fact that David has been replaced by this effigy. There was a violent earthquake The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. The place where he lay is David's bed and the empty tomb, or the cenotaph, the honorary tomb where the real body has not been placed. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." The women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." Jesus is acting like David, who survived Saul's attempt to assassinate him. And it's important to note that Matthew is the most Jewish-friendly of the Gospels, and it most strongly tries to identify Jesus with King David. The guards report, Well, the women were on their way. Some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests are, of course, playing the role of Saul, when Saul learned that David had escaped, he sent men to capture David 3 times, and they and he prophesied. That's told in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 18 to 24. And that once again ties it to the story of Orpheus, the oracle of Orpheus and the oracle of Apollo. So Saul begins to prophesy like the oracle of Apollo, and this relates to David as the oracle of Orpheus prophesying. Had met with the elders and devised a plan. They gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to stay." His disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed, and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. This incorporates all the stories that are told in Samuel about Saul's reaction when he is told about the effigy in David's bed, and he sends his soldiers out to try to find David, but they instead become prophets, and Saul himself becomes a prophet. Luke chapter 24 tells the last of the synoptic gospel versions of this tale. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. The women encountered the empty tomb of the cenotaph that had been placed in David's bed. Well, they were wondering about this. Suddenly, 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. These 2 men signify the duality of that idol and the 2 messiahs, the androgynous female aspect and the male aspect, the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Again, Messiah, son of Joseph, has been sacrificed so that Messiah, son of David, lives. The living David, Jesus Barabbas, has escaped, and the vessel of Jesus Christ has given over its soul to Messiah, son of David, and that soul appears as Jonathan in the form of John the Evangelist, the female aspect of Jesus Christ. He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again. The 3rd day here refers to the end of the age of Pisces, when the Christ returns as the Antichrist to smite the Christians for their 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. Jesus Christ spends the 3 days in the belly of the Leviathan, like Jonah, in the prison of the material world and the Gentiles. He then exterminates the Goyim and is freed from the prison of the Gentiles and becomes kosher, and Jewry is entitled to then consume the Eucharist of the Leviathan's flesh. Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, the empty tomb, the cenotaph, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles, but they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. It's not nonsense when you know the codes. And this is how Christians are deceived. They don't know this oral tradition, all these codes. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves. The strips of linen represent the cloth and the goat skin placed on the idolatrous effigy. And he went away wondering to himself what had happened. In chapter 20 of the Gospel of John, which is the most Gnostic of the Gospels, the same story is retold, but it differs in meaningful ways from the Synoptic Gospels. Michal, Mary Magdalene, goes to the empty tomb of Jesus, which is David's bed. She finds only, which is the cenotaph placed on David's bed. She finds only a sheet, but not the body of Jesus, just as a sheet covered the idol with goat's hair in David's bed in the story of David, and it was also clothed, which the messengers of Saul found when they arrived. Mary, like Michal, was beset with fear and anxiety when she learned that Jesus had escaped death like David. The empty tomb of Jesus was the cenotaph that was substituted for David. Jesus gives up his soul to David and is an empty tomb which honors the Messiah, son of David, by dying in his place and giving him the firstborn soul of Yehuda, just as all the firstborn were once sacrificed to Moloch, so that the second-born Jews could take their souls, blessings, and birthright, as Jacob did to Esau. Jonathan, who loved David as his own soul, appears as John, the evangelist, whom Jesus loved. John chapter 20. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene, Michal, went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. That's John the evangelist playing the role of Jonathan, the heir to the throne of King Saul, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." That represents David's escape. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The linen represents the cloth that had been placed on the idol, and the cloth represents the goat skin that was placed at its head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They did still not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. That symbolizes the soul fleeing the vessel of the idol and entering into David to complete the androgyne of the twin messiahs. When the disciples went back to where they were staying, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. The two idols represent the idol and the dual nature of the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David, as the right and the left hand, the right and the left side. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? They have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they have put him." At this time, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. This symbolizes Michal being reunited with David. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener. The gardener is the serpent in the Garden of Eden. This could be a reference to Jesus as the gardener of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as the serpent and the Gentiles who tend to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil until its fruit become ripe at the end of the 6 days. She said, "Sir, you have carried him away. Tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher, rabbi. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Instead of becoming king on earth, as David did, the Messiah, son of Joseph, Jesus, instead dies and returns to his father Satan in hell. So this reveals this whole narrative of the substitute full king who dies combating the Gentiles so that the real king can live, so that the gods are tricked into believing that, especially the god Satan, has consumed the flesh of the king who was cursed to death, and that curse is then lifted from the real king who can then live in peace and reign over as king of the Israelites. And that carries all the way over into the medieval apocalypses, including the apocalypse of Zerubbabel, Armilus, who is the leader of Roman Christianity, and the Messiah ben Yosef, who fails in battle but paves the way for the Davidic Messiah and the ultimate triumph of righteousness. That ultimate triumph of righteousness is to assimilate all the souls of the Gentiles by exterminating them and absorbing their soul, the soul of chaos, Yehida. The original author expected the Messiah would come in the immediate future. Subsequent editors substituted later dates. And this carries through to the Gaon of Vilna, to the Avkat Rochel and the story of Armilus told in that. And we see it playing out today as the battle between the Leviathan and the Behemoth. So it's quite a story. And I think I have cracked all the relevant codes and demonstrated where they came from. This ultimately goes back to the Canaanite mythology. And I guess I'm going to put that off to another video because my voice is starting to give out. You are able to watch this for free because people have given me contributions which enabled me to conduct this research and do this video. If you would like to contribute so that I can continue on with this research and finish up my books and publish them and make more videos, I'm going to continue to do videos as I go, explaining these incredible insights I have arrived at while decoding all of this for the third and fourth volumes of my books, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. Volume 3 is the Chaos Kampf, and Volume 4 is Final Judgment. Please do contribute. I won't be able to finish up, I'm afraid, if I can't afford to keep doing it. There are contribution links in the description below and at my website, CJBBooks.com. Beneath each title, you'll find those donation links. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, those who have contributed. This would not have been possible without you. I never would have had the time to arrive at all these important insights, decode them, and put them into my book and put them into this video. So thank you very, very much. I will see you all next time. Bye for now.